Who you? Who are you? Who am I? Who are we? So, at the very core of our being is, of course, something divine. And of course, we want to access that. But that's at the core of our being. Who are we day in, day out? So, there's the core of our being, there's the identity of who we are, then there's the functionality of who we are. Well, the functionality of who we are, a child born into this world, functionally, functionally is completely self-absorbed. Not its fault, not a question of blaming. That's reality. The functionality of a child completely self-absorbed. You know, at a certain point, you try to teach a child share. Sharing is caring. If you won't share, you won't have friends, right? It's nice to share. It's good to share, so on and so forth, right? And we try to teach our children to be good, right? The goodness is something that is taught. Now, I'm talking on a functional level. On a essential level, since created in the image of God, have a piece of God in us. So therefore, essentially we are good and essentially we'll become good, that's Mashiach. But on a functional level, we start off with an, animal soul. Godly soul enters thereafter as sort of secondary, and we need to tease it out in us. As we learn chapter 18 and 19 in Tanya, that it becomes real, the godly soul, a test of faith, when it's a question of giving up your life for your Jewishness, right? Then for the most part, that's when it becomes revealed across the board. Of course, we're learning chapters 18 through 25 and how to reveal it on a daily basis, the hidden love that we have. But who you on a functional level is the animal soul. It's the first responder to anything in life. I don't think instinctually about fulfilling, I don't want to say 100% of the time, but generally speaking, when something touches us, our response is based on, how, if it's good for me. Well, that's the animal soul talking, right? We're working on ourselves that we should, at the same time, also think and respond based on what's good for God. What does God want? What's his need? But we have to come to that. We're not going to just be that way. Doesn't happen. Even the real sweet soul, if it wasn't through Avodah, through divine service, their goodness is the goodness of the animal soul. The lioness takes care of her cubs. It's an instinctual thing. It's not something that you worked on to become, right? That's an important reality to recognize. Welcome to Tanya Today. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zich and Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you Tanya. We're in chapter 29, a very challenging and difficult Aveda, divine purpose, the divine service here. Speaking about the Beinoni, who has mastery over their actions, their speech, and their willful, cogitated thought. And yet, the Beinoni can have a dull heart, where the feeling of the passion, the feeling of connection is kind of dull. And the Beinoni wants to work on that, overcome the dullness of the heart. Wants to work on it. So the Alter Rebbe in this chapter, right? Just to give you the context of everything from chapter 25 onwards, we're speaking about joy. That we have to serve God with joy, no matter, yeah, there might be moments that we need to deal with stuff, but the overriding attitude and mindset is one of joy. That way you can fight life's battles when you have joy. But if you have the dullness of heart, then it's hard to have that joy. So the Alter Rebbe is giving in this chapter, in the next chapter, a method, a methodology on how you can break down the stone in your heart, a heart of stone that is feeling a dullness towards the divine, towards divinity. Doesn't mean the Beinoni is, of course, doing what you gotta do, saying what you gotta say, and not allowing negative thoughts to overtake the mind. That's absolutely. But that doesn't mean it's done with a joy, done with a passion. Not necessarily. And that's where the Beinoni wants to have complete responsibility, complete mastery over self, and to bring that spontaneity of the heart and the joy of connection into the divine service. So, unlike the righteous, who don't have to struggle with negativity, the righteous look at their body as like uh, a lowly, poor creature. That's what the body is. And therefore wants to game chesedim aluva be'onya. That's how I don't look at my body that way. When I need nourishment or whatever, I don't see something outside of me. You know, I sense that, hey, it's me. I need this to strengthen me. I don't see it, as this poor creature, that what I really am is my divine soul. So in my mind's eye, my divine soul, yes. And sometimes you're uplifted and you feel, your inner neshama, your inner soul. Okay. That's not the regular routine of the day. Regular routine of the day is you're feeling your body. Therefore, we're sick. Like I've said many times. If you feel your head, you have a headache. If you feel your back, you have a backache. Right? God forbid you should feel your spleen. Yee, that won't be good. Right? If you feel yourself, so then you're also sick. Yourself meaning your needs, being needy. So now in the Beinoni, since the Beinoni did not transform the animal soul, so therefore, who is the Beinoni? Even though they have mastery, like a pretty lofty individual, a Beinoni, mastery over all expressions of the soul, the garments of the soul that we call thought, speech, and action. Mastery. Yet Who is the Beinoni? Is his body and animal soul, because that's his first response in life, is the animal soul. Now, he's always engaged in a battle, so therefore it's not his only response to life. The godly soul pipes up, gives its opinion. But that's not the point that we're dealing with over here. We want a method on how to crush the negativity from within us and not allow the heart of stone that I'm feeling now to, to have any influence on me. Don't want to have a heart of stone. And when I say heart of stone, I don't mean, you know, you know, I'm talking about heart of stone to you know, the Bibas family. Okay, that's already not human. I'm talking about heart of stone towards God and your prayers. You're just not feeling, the warmth and the connection. And the Beinoni wants to deal with that. So the Beinoni looks at himself functionally, not what he is in identity. Identity, we're actually going to afterwards come to that, explain that. This is a functional aspect of the individual, as opposed to the identity or the core of the person. The core of the person is Beinoni has got a part of God in, and therefore that's the core essence of the Beinoni. And even identity can identify with that, even though that might not be functionally what you are, you know, first responder in life. You say about Richard Nixon. They say about Richard Nixon, so that and this is when JFK was, before we knew things about him, right? So they have big portraits, right? It's a portrait of him, JFK, and next to him is Richard Nixon. So he's looking up and he says, when you look at the portrait of JFK, you look at what you want to be. When you look at the portrait of me, you're looking at who you are. So I have portraits of the Rebbe right? Because that's who I want to look up to and emulate, right? But then there's who we are, right? Who we are. And not who we are in identity here we're talking about. Again, functionally, we're removed from God because we have the Beinoni's. This is what he's thinking. I'm removed from God. Why? Because I have lusts. I drive from the animal soul. I'm even capable I'm capable of lusting something that's forbidden. Now, the Beinoni would never act upon it, right? But he can have the lust for it, right? Therefore, the Beinoni is talking to himself and saying this, right? Therefore, I'm inferior and loathsome to the most abominable, unclean animals. I'm worse than a reptile. Actually, as King David says, but I am a worm and not a man. I'm worse than a worm. Because a worm is what a worm, because that's the way God made it. But me, I'm not even a man because I'm worse than a worm because I could choose to do wrong, go off the path, right? Now, again, the Beinoni doesn't, but he could. In brackets, the Alter Rebbe says, but the Beinoni during his prayers is experiencing revealed love of God, and there's no room in his heart then for mundane desires. Yeah, but the Beinoni knows that doesn't last. Even when he does have it, it doesn't last. So therefore, it's not true. It's not real. As opposed to the righteous, they always have a love of God, no matter what activity they're engaged in. Now he goes further, and especially Remember, it's not something for you to try if you're just engaged now in learning Tanya. And even if you've learned this for a long time, I do this in a very, specific manner for myself. We got to be careful with this. Don't try this at home. Now he goes further. The Beinoni is an adult, but then he thinks, and remember the whole point over here. There's an agenda here. And the agenda is the dullness of the heart, the stone that's in the heart. I want to crush that negativity to allow the flame of the soul to ignite and to reveal itself with a passion and a love for God, right? So this is the methodology to crush it. So remember, the Beinoni doesn't do any sin, but maybe in his youth he did. So he's thinking back to his youth, right? Things that he may have done that contaminated. He already did tshuva on that. He already repented on it. Yet in heaven, everything's eternal. So the act had an eternal ramification. So therefore, it's even present now, that act, at least in a heavenly way, right? And further, the heart has many layers. So when you do tshuva, and we see that for ourselves, right? That the more you are deeper into your heart, the more you realize the crime that was committed. On the surface, it was a surface crime. When you dig deeper inside of you, you see that it was deeper. And therefore, there's more ownership with time, not less ownership of what we did in the past. So since there's greater layers of the heart, and the Beinoni now is more mature than in their youth, therefore, the tshuva they do now is a much deeper one as a result. Wow. And after all, sins do separate us from God. And you want to have a deeper repentance now than, even though you took care of it, the sins of youth many years ago, perhaps. And this is, in conclusion, what King David says, that my sins are constantly before me at a distance, that I can always retrieve it and use it as a way to get closer to God. In this instance, a way to crush the negativity within me, to crush the heart of stone that needs to be crushed. That's what the Beinoni is. So again, I want to repeat that this is a methodology to use when the Beinoni, and we're not Beinonis. So why are we learning this? Because there are elements we can take from this. That there are times that sometimes we have to think about, our situation, our functional situation, and that there are things that need to be owned and things that need to be fixed. And sometimes, and that might be a very specific thing that needs to be fixed. Here, it's a much more general, kind of fixing a heart, when we're feeling a dullness in life. Right? If there's a specific thing that you did wrong to somebody, so then specifically that thing needs to be dealt with, right? Here it's more about a general feeling of not, full on connection, and therefore the Beinoni is more thinking of a generality of themselves, right? Again, that they are worse than a non-kosher animal, right? Worse than a worm, because they're doing exactly what God wants them to do, and I'm not. So in that respect, I'm worse. Again, not in your identity, not in your core being. We're talking about in the functionality of your day. And we got to be careful with this because this could get us down and we could feel guilty. If you feel guilt, then you know that's your animal soul talking. Your animal soul, and that we have to be careful because then it would have the opposite effect. This is all to spur us on to greater heights. This is what it is. Any questions? Any comments? One, the take home that I have from this, at least, is that the heart has many layers. And let's say, you know, which means ownership of things that are of the heart. There's greater and greater depths of what we can own. So on the surface, if we did something to a loved one, we will own it only so far. When we grow up and mature, and we look into it further into our hearts, we'll be able to own it much more deeply and make deeper change from within. That is something that you can probably see now. It's something that you said sorry or owned it to someone, let's say a year ago. And now the same thing came up. Hopefully, you grew in that year and you're able to dig deeper in your heart and to take greater ownership than you did a year ago for a similar thing, right? That's what it means. Even though here I'm just giving an example, it's a new sin, Don't go back to that person and say you're sorry from a year ago. That's not the point over here. Right? This is between you and God in any case. If it was something with another person, you got to work it out with them, in a timely fashion, not a year later, or not go back, to them. But, if they, unless there's something that's still on their heart, a negativity towards you because you didn't dig deep enough inside of you to take a fuller ownership of what you did. So now a year later, after learning Tanya, you have greater ownership of what happened a year ago. Maybe now you could go to that person and in a healthier way, in a more mature manner, ask for forgiveness. That is a point, yeah. Jeff has a question. What is the main difference between this chapter and yesterday's chapter? I'm having a hard time understanding the difference. Well, the truth is, I gotta tell you, Jets, I kind of went over yesterday and did some of yesterday, some of it today. Yet today's class, I did some of it yesterday, a little bit of it. I didn't realize that I went over. Um, so in this class, where we didn't speak yesterday, but the layers of the heart that we can have the sin constantly before us, as King David says, meaning that we can always dig deeper into our hearts and have greater ownership of what we have done. So that is something new. And also the sins of youth we didn't speak about yesterday. Okay. Henya Tova. Well, okay, we'll speak. Thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? Eric, thank you for joining. All righty. Amazing. Again, we live in a day and age that it's very hard to be down on ourselves because we do it from guilt. That's the animal soul talking. Don't do it from guilt. That's why the Alter Rebbe said, 2 days ago, you have to set aside a time when you're calm and you're dealing with it, not and where you're like feeling anxious because, oh, I did something and, I'm anxious because of it. No, that's not good. Um, yeah, so we're living in a day and age that, we got to be positive. And in a sense, it's a uniqueness of our times that the first and most important thing is to engage in a positive connection with God through positive mitzvahs, right? If you're Jewish, a man putting on tefillin. I got to share, I just got a text from a fellow shliach. Whoa, amazing story. A fellow shliach gets a call from someone and he says, Rabbi, what kind of prayer could I do for the Bibas family? I just want to do something for them. So he said, I have something better than just a simple prayer. Why don't you just come, the Bibas boys will never have a bar mitzvah and will never put on tefillin. Why don't you do that for them? Start putting on tefillin because they're not able to. I said to the Rabbi, done. Get me a pair of tefillin, done. A little while later on that day, gets a call from someone. He wants to do something, in honor of the Bibas family. I wanna buy a pair of tefillin for someone who's going to put on tefillin. Oh my gosh, the rabbi was just blown away. What was it, a couple hours earlier? This guy wants to put on tefillin. Get me a pair of tefillin. And now someone calls up. I want to give a pair of tefillin. And both for the Bibas family. So we're living in a time that we have to focus on doing positive, good things, mitzvahs. So Jewish men over the age of 13, do that. Put on your tefillin. You don't have tefillin? Contact me and we'll work on getting you tefillin. That's for Jewish men. Jewish women, Shabbos candles if you're not lighting already. Jewish men and Jewish women. Also, there's kosher, mezuzah, right? Someone who isn't Jewish, charity, tzedakah. I mean, that's for, across the board. Prayer, So more important focusing on that. If we're waiting for someone to apologize to us, is that our ego an animal soul? I would suggest it is. How could you be waiting for someone to apologize? Does your godly soul, think about it, if you focus in a moment, close your eyes and think about a deeper part of you, do I need an apology? Maybe they need the apology. They need to apologize for their sake, for their growth. Your godly soul doesn't need an apology. Your animal soul that was hurt, diminished, felt less than, it needs an apology. Should they give an apology? Yeah, they should give an apology, but that's something they need to recognize. Do I need the apology? No. As a matter of fact, we say every night, in our prayers before we go to sleep, Ribbon Shalom, Master of the Universe, I hereby forgive anybody that has wronged me, has hurt me, whether financially, physically, emotionally. I forgive them. They didn't ask for forgiveness, so I forgive them on my own. That's the godly soul talking. Nancy, how does one change the feelings of guilt? Know that it's coming from your animal's soul and it's not appropriate. Don't give it room to germinate in your mind. Don't give it free rent. Don't let it think, you're not going to change your feelings, your emotions. That's the righteous do. We're not going to do that, but at least we don't allow it to be a thought that I contemplate. What about when people mock you for being Jewish and make anti-Semitic comments? Don't don't let it bother you. Evil people are evil people, and you know, evil people are evil people. Don't let it. Margot, what should one do when you haven't realized you did something wrong until years later? So not going back to the person, but how do you repent? Maybe you could go back to that person. I don't know. You know, I don't know the circumstance and so on. So I can't say specifically, but entertain the thought of maybe going back to that person. And if not, then uh, you know, if that person still is holding something against you, then you do want to go back to that person. It's going to be uncomfortable. All right, it's going to be uncomfortable. Not something you like. Okay. So it just says to fight back, show them greater Jewishness. Yeah, or consider them as nothing, right? Like the Eight Sahara, our animal soul, we should consider it as just an eagle that is soaring high, you know, and is just full of hot air, right? So, consider that. Like, don't give evildoers space. Don't give them opportunity, don't engage them. We had that, right? The uncircumcised heathen, right? The uncircumcised heathen, we had that. All right, folks, Rambam is coming up. We're going to conclude tomorrow the whole year cycle, or 11 months or so. Amazing. So come join us.